Kinmen, the story. Kinmen, an island between two worlds. It's an introduction to Kinmen and its unique position. Kinmen is nestled less than 2 kilometers from the Chinese city of Xiamen. Kinmen is a small, rocky island with a complex history caught between two identities. It's a place where the past and the present intersects in a way that only few outside Asia know. Kinmen is administered by Taiwan, but sits right in the side of the Chinese mainland, and it's a focal point in historical tension between Taiwan and China. Yet, despite all media portrayal, there is no current active conflict between Kinmen and the mainland. Instead, Kinmen is marked by a quieter, nuanced relationship between Taiwan and China, a reality that often stands in good contrast with the international perception. Let me go back in history to give you a little bit of perspective on this whole issue. The historical background is that the Kuomintang took the small island, and to understand that we have to go back to 1949. During the Chinese Civil War, the Nationalist Party, or Kuomintang, led by Chiang Kai-shek, retreated from the mainland to Taiwan. At this point, Kinmen was retained as a military stronghold. Chiang Kai-shek himself visited the island as a show of resilience against the communist forces. For decades, Kinmen was heavily militarized, symbolic the free world standing against communism. But in 1950, Kinmen was the site of intense artillery exchanges between the KMT and the People's Liberation Army, with sporadic shelling continued until late 1979. Remnants of all these battles still mark the islands, from bunkers to unexploded shells. The history of Kinmen is profoundly shaped by this role as strategic stronghold from the Kuomintang during and after the Chinese Civil War. Following the fall of mainland China to the Communist Party in 1949, the KMT, led by Chiang Kai-shek, retreated to Taiwan, if you consider that a fall to the Communist Party, of course. In this process, Kinmen became a crucial front line, representing the last major post of the KMT-controlled Free China, just a few kilometers away off the coast of the communist-controlled Xiamen, 2 kilometers to be exact. From the early 1950s through the late 1970s, Kinmen stood up as a symbol of defiance against the People's Republic of China, PRC, and embodied Taiwan's stance in the Cold War caught between opposing ideologies. And Chiang Kai-shek himself viewed Kinmen as an unbreachable stronghold, strategically and symbolically critical to the regime. He personally visited the island on multiple occasions to reinforce its role defending Taiwan against the communist forces, and to inspire both the military and civilians for the notion that Kinmen represented the free world in the struggle against communism for the KMT. Kinmen was not just a defensive position. It was a symbol of ideology, resistance, marking the boundaries between communist and nationalist China. This military reality in Kinmen was intense. During the 50s, the island was facing heavy shelling from the PLA, particularly in the first and second Taiwan Strait Crises of 1954 and 1955, and later on in 1958. During this crisis, Kinmen endured relentless artillery bombing from the mainland. At the height of the conflict, it was estimated that the PLA fired over 470,000 shells at Kinmen in a matter of weeks, leaving deep physical and psychological scars on the island. As a response, the KMT fortified Kinmen with thousands of troops, reinforced the island with bunkers, tunnels, and anti-aircraft defenses. Living on Kinmen during this period was experience of near constant militarization. The population was largely comprised of soldiers and military personnel, with civilians caught in the harsh existence under military rule. The island's infrastructure focused almost entirely on defense, with extensive tunnel system built into the rock to provide protection from artillery and potential invasion. The Yunguang Tower, a famous monument on the island, was constructed during this period as a moral boosting symbol of the Kinmen commitment to resilience and strength. Propaganda played a significant role in maintaining moral and demonstrating Kinmen's resolve. Loudspeakers installed across the island blared anti-communist messages and patriotic songs towards Xiamen, aiming to influence and demoralize mainland soldiers and civilians. This constant broadcast of propaganda, paired with the thunderously shelling exchanges, marked a unique psychological front in the Cold War, turning Kinmen into a stage for ideological confrontations. In addition to its defensive military presence, the US also recognized Kinmen's strategic importance in a broader Cold War context. Though it did not station any troops in Kinmen, the US supported Taiwan with military aid and logistics, bolstering the island defenses, and helped maintain the KMT presence in this critical location. This support was part of the broader strategy to contain the spread of communism in East Asia. By the late 1970s, as Taiwan shifted from a period of martial law to gradually democratization, Kinmen military rule began to decline. The normalization of US-China relationship and changing political dynamics reduced the island's strategy. In 1992, martial law was lifted on Kinmen, and the once critical military outpost became its transformation into a site historical political memory rather than an active military stronghold. Today, Kinmen's island bear the marks of the past, remnants of bunkers, miles of tunnels, and many artillery shells repurposed into memorials and decorations across the island. These remnants remind visitors and residents alike of Kinmen's past and its unique role in the Cold War, representing a microcosm of the intense ideological battle between China and Taiwan. Kinmen stands as a symbol of resilience and a living testament to a complete legacy of the KMT strategy gamble in keeping a foothold on the front lines of mainland China. What was the life of Kinmen? It was a really wartime hardship, and the military presence was immense. During the conflict years, the island's population was dominated by soldiers and the presence of a military-based economy. Living conditions were harsh. Due to military priorities, Kinmen lacked substantial agriculture, and a large portion of the land was unsafe due to unexploded ordnance. Supplies arrived from Taiwan by boat or plane, furthering its reliance on Taiwan. Civilians had limited freedom, and basic needs often took second place to defense concerns. Military life in Kinmen was marked by intense psychological and physical demands. The island's rocky terrain led to a construction of an extensive tunnel system, kilometers of narrow, damp corridors designed as defense shelters. These tunnels, through very impressive feats of engineering, were dark, humid, and uncomfortable, making life challenging for soldiers who were stationed there. During the height of the cross-strait tensions, life on Kinmen was marked by severe hardships, defined by heavy militarization and ever-present threat of conflict with the nearby Chinese mainland. Positioned just kilometers away from China, Kinmen served as a strategic front line, an outpost for Taiwan, who did not get the risks of all these dangers. This status transformed the island into a heavy fortified military zone with survival often took precedence over everyday life. The military presence on Kinmen was overwhelming. Thousands of soldiers sent to defend the island lived in difficult conditions far from the comforts of home, with nearly all resources directed toward defense. Everyday life for both soldiers and civilians was challenging. The local population, though very small, struggled alongside stationed military personnel. There were little land available for agriculture, and Kinmen relied heavily on imports from Taiwan for food, water, and even basic supplies. The constant threat of artillery shelling left vast areas of the land unsafe. Kinmen's wartime experience was its extensive propaganda system. The loudspeakers across the island faced the mainland, broadcasting music, free world propaganda, and anti-communist messages into Xiamen. This psychological warfare continued day and night, creating a surreal atmosphere, and today's tourists can still feel when they explore Kinmen's war relics. The loudspeakers were dismantled in 1991, symbolizing a shift toward reducing tension. But their memory lingers in Kinmen's cultural narrative. During the years of intense militarization on Kinmen, especially through the 1950s and 60s, the island bore witness to a hidden, dark reality. Forced prostitution, organized to serve the needs of the soldiers stationed on this isolated outpost. For decades, the strategic island was not only a focal point of the cross-strait tension between Taiwan and China, but also the settle of a less-known chapter in the human cost of conflict. As a part of the broader military infrastructure, makeshift comfort stations were established on Kinmen to cater to the thousands of soldiers stationed there. Historical accounts and witnesses' testimonies reveal that many of the women brought to Kinmen were not voluntary participants. They were coerced or trafficked into those roles. Some were prisoners, when the others were forcified, relocated from the mainland, driven into a life of involuntary service to maintain morale among soldiers isolated on the island. This system of forced prostitution was systematically organized and sanctioned as a means to control soldier behavior and provide relief in the harsh conditions of war. The women involved were endured extremely difficult living conditions, were often seen as expendable. They faced abuse and confinement with limited choices. For many, their options were constrained to either work in low-wage labor or serve as comfort women. Both options were rife with the risk of exploitation and violence. The plight of this woman has largely been omitted from the historical records, both by authorities and by broader society. Many were silenced and marginalized, their experience undocumented and unacknowledged. Few records or formal acknowledgement of this period exist, as it was often dismissed as in official narratives. After the martial law era was finished in 1987, some survivors of their descendants began to tell their stories, slowly bringing to the light these overlooked aspects of wartime Kinmen. Today, efforts remember and honor this woman remain limited, and discussions around this painful history are often met with resistance. Despite this, their stories are an essential part of understanding the human impact of the conflict in Kinmen. The hidden reality of forced prostitution in Kinmen underscores the often untold stories of exploitation in wartime. These women who suffered remained largely invisible, embody the unspoken cost of militarization, and remind us of the need for a deeper recognition with the past. As Kinmen transition into a peaceful tourist destination, the island holds an unspoken history that serves as a powerful testament to the resilience of those who endured its darkest chapters. Life for the soldiers on Kinmen was marked by hardships, but it also carried their darker aspect. Historical records and testimonies reveal that alongside the military installations, the government-sanctioned brothels provide relief for the soldiers. Women, many of whom were prisoners or brought from the mainland, were given limited choices: work or serve in these brothels. For those in those confined worlds, survival often came as a significant personal cost, and their stories are a stark reminder of the human impact of militarization and war. Kinmen's story is interwoven with Taiwan's broader political landscape. While Kinmen was locked in military readiness, Taiwan itself underwent the brutal White Terror period of the KMT, backed by the US, imposed martial laws to maintain control. For decades, any perceived dissidents faced imprisonment, torture, or even death. It wasn't until 1987 that martial law ended, and Taiwan embarked on a path toward democracy. This period highlights the complexity of Taiwan's history as it shifted from a tightly controlled regime to a vibrant democratic society. The West, now vocal in support of Taiwan, largely turned a blind eye to these authoritarian practices. The White Terror in Taiwan represents one of the darkest periods in the island's political history, spanning nearly 4 decades from 1947 until the end of martial law in 1987. Initiated by the Kuomintang, the White Terror in Taiwan represents one of the darkest periods in the island's political history, spanning nearly 4 decades from 1947 until the end of martial law in 1987. Initiated by the Kuomintang government under Chiang Kai-shek, the White Terror was a campaign of suppression aimed at consolidating KMT position and eliminating opposition, perceived or real. This era of political repression profoundly shaped Taiwan's political landscape, laying a difficult path to democracy it holds today. The origin, the root of the White Terror can be traced back to the 228 incident. On February 28, 1947, a nationwide uprising against the corrupt and authoritarian rule of the KMT, which had taken control of Taiwan after Japan's defeat in World War II. When tensions escalated into protest, the KMT responded with brutal force, resulting in a massacre where an estimated 18,000 to 28,000 civilians were killed. This event, known as the 228 incident, cast a long shadow on Taiwan's society and laid the groundwork for decades of fear and distrust between government and the Taiwanese people. The White Terror targeting anyone who might be considered a threat to the KMT regime. In the name of national security, the government arrested, imprisoned, tortured, and executed tens of thousands of people, often without trial or formal charges. Intellectuals, students, political activists, and even ordinary citizens were labeled as communist sympathizers or traitors for advocating democratic reforms or expressing dissents. At least 140,000 individuals were reported imprisoned and around 3,000 to 4,000 were executed during this period. Families of those accused faced social stigmatism, job loss, and constant surveillance. Political prisoners were frequently held in prisons such as Green Island, a remote location of Taiwan's eastern coast. Green Island became synonymous with torture, forced labor, and indoctrination, where prisoners were required to undergo ideological re-education. Those who survived their imprisonment bore lifelong scars, both physical and psychological, and many families still struggle to reconcile with their painful past. The KMT established a complex network of secret police and informants who monitored the public. The Intelligence Bureau and Taiwan Garrison Command were powerful agencies that executed most of the surveillance and repression. They acted with nearly unchecked authority, and their presence instilled widespread fear. Citizens avoided discussing politics, even with close friends, for fear of being reported. And the role of the United States in this kind of Cold War context. The KMT received substantial support from the United States as part of the broader Cold War strategy to contain communism in Asia, despite being aware of the authoritarian practice in Taiwan. The US saw the KMT as a critical ally against Communist China and provided military, economical, and political support. This support shielded the KMT regime from international criticism, allowing the government to continue the repressive practice largely unchecked. The US helped bolster Taiwan's defenses and provided aid that contributed to Taiwan's economic growth. However, this partnership came at the cost of democratic freedoms for Taiwan's people. It was not until the 1970s and early 1980s as the US began to shift its recognition from the KMT government in Taiwan to the People's Republic of China on the mainland that Taiwan's political landscape began to change. Through the 1970s and 80s, Taiwan underwent significant social-economic transformations. The growth of an educated middle class and the increasing urbanization of society and the emerge of a younger generation dissatisfied with the authority system ruled laid the groundwork for Taiwan's democratization. Grassroots movement began to take root, led by activists who risked imprisonment to demand political reforms and greater freedom. One of the turning points was the Kaohsiung incident in 1979, where pro-democratic protest was violently suppressed by the government. The incident garnered international attention and intensified calls for human rights in Taiwan, ultimately leading to the creation of Taiwan's first opposition party, the Democratic Progressive Party, in 1986. Despite its technically illegal status, the DPP grew in influence, pressuring the KMT to move toward political reforms. In 1987, President Chiang Kai-shek, son of Chiang Kai-shek, took the monumental step of lifting martial law. This marked the end of the White Terror and opened the doors to political reform, freedom of speech, and civil rights in Taiwan. In the years that followed, Taiwan held its first direct presidential elections in 1996, a milestone signaled its transition from authoritarian rules to a vibrant, but the legacy of the White Terror still is curving and lingering in Taiwan today. The trauma of those years remain a sensitive issue, with many survivors and their families continue to seek justice and recognition for their suffering in recent years. Taiwan government has taken some steps toward reconciliation, included the establishment of the Transitional Justice Commission, which aimed to investigate the abuse of the White Terror period and provide compensation to the victims. The memory of the White Terror also played a significant role in shaping Taiwan's political identity. Many Taiwans see their democratic freedom as hard-won, a result of years of struggle against authoritarian rule. This experience has created a unique sense of what they call the Taiwanese identity, distinct from the mainland of China, and has fueled that ongoing debate about Taiwan's so-called independence and its relation to the PRC. Today, Taiwan's political system stands as a testament to its resilience and commitment to freedom, not against China, but against the White Terror. Once a period of oppression had become a powerful reminder of the value of democratic rights and the importance of political transparency. Taiwan's journey from dictatorship to democracy remains a source of pride for its people and serves as a foundation for its distinct identity in the political global stage. Taiwan and China has such a complex relationship. The story of Kinmen also touches on the broader narrative of the way Taiwan and China are related to each other. Taiwan's seat in the United Nations was controversial, handed to the People's Republic of China in 1971, following a compromise involving the US and other allies. This decision marked a critical turning point in Taiwan's international status. Despite current geopolitical tensions, Taiwan and China share deeply rooted historical and cultural ties. Families are still connected across the Taiwan Strait, and trade, tourism, and even popular culture flows between them. For Kinmen residents, these connections are visible every day, and many locals feel closer to their neighbors in Xiamen than to the distance of Taipei. Kinmen today is a living moment of history. Today it's a peaceful but poignant reminder of that past. It has become a niche tourist destination for those interested in the military history and the complexity of East Asia's geopolitics.